I cracked up. I saw this Stewart Mandel responding to Chris Vanini of theathletic.com, ranking all 134 FBS college teams from Ohio State to Kennesaw State. And Stewart said, always well-received and non-controversial. That, of course, very tongue-in-cheek. Stewart, thank you for your time. What's it like just to finally, with all that goes on in college athletics, to have a week where there are games this weekend?
It's awesome. It's can't come soon enough. As much as I like writing these season preview stories, at some point you're like, I wish we had actual games to write about instead of all these on paper predictions that we know half of them I'll end up looking like an idiot for.
Stewart, as you know, the both the polls are out. Did anything that the majority voted in these kind of stick out to you, or you think was off a little bit?
Well, I wouldn't say there's anything completely surprising. One thing that I kind of noticed is, okay, Oregon is number 3 in both the AP and coaches polls, and that seems a little bit like, are we getting a little bit ahead of ourselves on Oregon? Remember, they had a great season, but the 2 games against Washington, their defense didn't play great. But then it's like, well, who would you put there instead that you wouldn't have the same questions about? It just really illustrated to me that we have 2, on paper, loaded teams in Georgia and Ohio State. And then I think there's a drop-off where everybody else has questions, including number 5 Alabama, who lost the greatest coach in history.
Stewart, as far as this weekend goes, with Florida State starting off in the top 10, we know what happened a few months back, and it's a bit of a different-looking team. Georgia Tech, a team that comes in with a lot of people high on what they could potentially do if they can reach their ceiling. What do you think about the Noles coming off of the fiasco at the end of last year and just the state of the ACC as these two teams kick off the conference?
The interesting thing is Georgia Tech actually has more continuity. Same quarterback, same star running back, 4 or 5 offensive linemen. Now, they weren't nearly as good as Florida State last year, but are they capable of pulling a surprise? I think so. Florida State has basically changed over, almost all the key guys from last year are off to the NFL. New quarterback, although we've certainly seen a lot of DJ. So they're a bit of a wild card. They're certainly more talented than Georgia Tech, I believe. And I do think, DJ has never lived up to the 5-star billing from high school, but he got a lot better at Oregon State last year, and he's played a lot of college football. So I kind of expect to see an up and down performance in that first game, but Florida State should win. I just don't think I don't think an upset is out of the possibility.
It's interesting you say the continuity because Haynes King is back. Georgia Tech, a pretty good team with Coach Pry, and a little bit of momentum too, and who knows how that might happen. Especially when a long road trip too, on your way to Ireland. When you look at the Power 4 conferences, the Big Ten, the SEC, the ACC, and also the Big 12, which of them, in your opinion, is the most intriguing after so much movement?
I got to say the SEC, and I think that the SEC, while it's always considered the best conference, has a chance to be particularly loaded this year because of the quarterbacks that are coming back. Carson Beck is, projected to be the number 1 quarterback in the draft. Jalen Milroe is obviously a proven guy. Jackson Dart at Ole Miss. Quinn Ewers at Texas. And then, the SEC teams often get criticized for not playing a strong enough schedule, but nobody's going to say that about Georgia this year. They're playing 3 preseason top 10 teams all on the road, plus Clemson in the opener at a neutral site. You don't usually see Alabama go to play a team like at Wisconsin. They have Georgia. I just think the effect of realignment, the effect of Texas and Oklahoma joining what was already an extremely strong conference, you're just going to see so many blockbuster games in that league on a week in, week out basis.
Stewart Mandel, theathletic.com, with us on 365 Sports.
Stewart, do you think that any of the offseason, conference intrigue type things will spill into this regular season, or do you think we're due for some downtime before it kicks back up again, particularly Florida State and Clemson and the ACC and their ongoing court mediation and battles?
Yeah, I think that depends on what happens in the courts. And what's crazy is there are 4 different lawsuits at work here because, those schools filed lawsuits against the ACC, and the ACC turned around and filed lawsuits against them. But a key date came and went last week. August 15th was the deadline to, if they were going to choose to try to withdraw by in time for next season, next school year. So they didn't do that. So right now it's just kind of held up in the courts. You never say never about other conference movement, but it does feel like, first the schools all changed around, and then those conferences did their new TV deals. And so in theory, there shouldn't be more movement until those TV deals come up again in 6 or 7 years.
Stewart, are you as I don't know. I feel like there's been a different tone when talking about Texas making this move, and I understand that it's based on what we've seen lately versus Oklahoma making this move to the SEC. There seems to be a lot more people sure of Texas' success versus OU's, even though historically OU is a more successful program. Do you think it'll be a tougher fit for the Sooners, at least early on, or do you think that's being overblown a little bit?
I think we all have short-term memory, and obviously Texas made the playoff last year and came down to the last play against Washington. So, of course, people are high on them, going into this year, whereas Oklahoma took a bit of a step back 2 years ago. They were definitely better last year than the year before, but they haven't been in the playoff in, 3 or 4 years now. So I get it, but what I would say is be careful with Texas. Quinn Ewers is great. His receivers are great. They've lost 2 of their top running backs for the season and preseason. They're down to 3 scholarship running backs before the season even starts. And you're going to play a full, SEC grind. Coaches I've talked to wonder how they're going to replace those 2 first and second round defensive tackles. And, it's just going to be a much more difficult schedule than they played last year, starting with week 2 at Michigan, at the defending national champs. So I don't think it's easy for either Texas or Oklahoma. I do think Texas is probably more proven in terms of the personnel they have, but I wouldn't assume that one is, immediately comes in and contends for the SEC title and that Oklahoma is far from it.
You did the predictions on the SEC, and you have 5 teams at 10-2 or better. 11-1 Georgia, 4-way tie at 6-2 with Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, and Tennessee behind 7-1 Georgia. If the standings end up that way, which of those teams? How many of those teams will be a part of the 12-team college football playoff?
Okay, I'm glad. I thought where you were going with that was which of the 4, 6, and 2 teams would play in the SEC title game. And I don't have the foggiest idea.
Yeah.
In part because they haven't actually published their tiebreaker yet. I would think any 10-2 team from the SEC is going to make the playoff. Though we don't know yet how the committee is going to handle. Everybody says, okay, these 2 have separated themselves from the Big 12 and ACC, but when push comes to shove, if there's a 11-2 Big 12 team that lost in the league title game and a 10-2 SEC team that didn't play in theirs, which way would they go? Mm-hmm. And obviously, that's going to depend on schedules and how many top 25 teams you beat and whatnot. But I think the general expectation is that you play in the SEC or Big 10, you win 10 games, there's going to be room for you in the 12-team playoff. If anything, we will see how often a 9-win team gets in. LSU last year was 9-3 and had a terrible defense, and based on the rankings, would have made the playoff. So there's definitely going to be room some years for that.
Stewart, which team do you see likely? You mentioned Texas, being careful with them. Which team do you see being a dangerous disappointment this year?
Dangerous disappointment. Mm-hmm. I'm concerned that we're too far ahead on Oregon. I do think, obviously, offensively and skill positions, they're great. I think there's the perception of how talented they are in defense has gotten a little bit ahead of where they actually are. There are good players, but they're not brimming with elite first-round type defensive players. And last year, Washington really took advantage of that in their 2 meetings. Now, it's not like the Big Ten is a murderer's row this year. But for whatever reason, Oregon has come to be viewed as in a different category than, they've been viewed as more closer to Ohio State than to Penn State and Michigan. And I don't know if we're there yet. They do have a decent schedule in terms of what they drew in the Big Ten this year, but we just don't know. We've never, the people who are just assuming they'll go in and be great, we don't know. We've never seen a situation like this where Oregon's going to, in November, they're going to play at Michigan and at Wisconsin. These are not easy trips, and they're going to make 2 of them. We've never seen a team have to do that before this whole super conference era. So we should keep an eye on that, I think.
Stewart, what is your opinion on the Big 12 as a league entering this season? There, clearly there's the two big ones that everybody always talks about that gets the most shine, and it has the biggest matchups now because of realignment. But the Big 12 stands to benefit the Arizona, Utah additions alone. It's been so much change, so much turnover, but it seems like a league that's got a little bit of momentum and a little bit of the fact that the unknown is sort of exciting. Where do you see the Big 12 as far as interest level this season?
I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be a very exciting race because there's so many teams. I've heard people say 6, 7, 8 teams they could see winning the conference. Utah's the favorite, but I don't think anybody thinks they're, head and shoulders above anybody else in that top pack. Kansas State will definitely be in the mix, I think. Kansas, Arizona, as you mentioned. Oklahoma State was in the title game last year, and I feel like people have already forgotten that. So just right on down the list. Now, the problem is I don't see a national championship contender in that group. And as we get into the playoff era, I think conferences will probably be judged by, they're all going to get their champion in, but how far does that team go once they're in there? But in terms of regular season race, I would be surprised if I would assume we'll get down to the end of the season and that race is still very much up for grabs.
How long did it take for you to come up with that press conference of the primer for college football season with all that's changed?
Not that long. My editor asked me to do a idiot's guide to all the changes in college football this year. And I don't know, for some reason I thought of that format of a press conference full of reporters, if you will, who have been asleep for the last 5 years. But I will say it was very fun to write. And kind of, I was kind of realizing in the moment, because look, I cover the sport. I've known about all these developments, but seeing them all in one place, the conference changes, the playoff format, the coaching, the fact that Nick Saban is no longer Alabama's coach, and that's like the 4th biggest change this season. It's pretty staggering how much the sport has changed just in the span of a couple of years.
Stewart, should a program, let's use Michigan as an example. They win the national title, run the table 15-0. Harbaugh has a show cause, and whatever else still comes out of the investigation. I'm not a fan of redacting wins or things like that. How do you feel like that should be handled?
I do think they probably will vacate wins because that's just a standard NCAA penalty. But I don't know that really changes anything. I mean, there's been lots of great teams over the years that had to vacate wins and you don't even know about it or you don't even remember it. But really, I think the legacy of that thing will be, do they get a postseason ban or not? Because that's really the only punishment the NCAA has at its disposal that's truly consequential. They might fine the school. Michigan can afford whatever fine. They gave Harbaugh the show cause. He's never coming back to college as it is. It's, if Michigan is banned from next year's playoff because of a postseason ban, that would really hit them, where it hurts. And I do think that even though you can debate how serious or not serious the Connor Stallions scheme was, the NCAA is clearly coming down hard on it because of Harbaugh, because of how much he lied to them in the interview about the other thing, being a repeat offender. Even Sharon Moore is now a repeat offender. I do think that they're going to try to punish them. It's just, what can they do that actually that's actually meaningful?
When it comes to lying them about the other thing, and a lot has been made of that, did he do that just because he thought it was so stupid? Or, I mean, and again, it doesn't really, did he just know it didn't matter? It seems weird to me to lie about something to the NCAA now, given that the thing they can punish you for more is the lying and less about the rule you actually broke.
Well, what I always say about Jim Harbaugh is he's a weird guy. He's very different than most people. And so trying to get in his head and guess motivation is futile because his head works differently than everybody else's. But it seems to me he just didn't have much respect for the NCAA. We are definitely in a different era. People used to fear the NCAA. Well, as if the NCAA is investigating you, you need to, do everything you possibly can, beg for mercy. And that's just not the way schools handle it now, unless they want to get their coach fired. Tennessee was happy to offer up Jeremy Pruitt to the NCAA. But if it's somebody you actually want to keep or respect or value, like people don't cooperate that much with the NCAA anymore. But the thing with him is you don't often see a transcript of an interview like that where he just flat out got caught, like openly lying about those meetings with the recruits. And like you said, I think in the NCAA's eyes, that's more troubling than the things themselves.
Stewart, it's been unbelievable the last 3 to 4 years of what we've seen in college football. Appreciate your time. I'm sure there's more to come, but man, not sure it could ever top what we've seen across the board, as you mentioned, and also in your story. Thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Stewart Mandel, theathletic.com, with us on 365 Sports. His Big 12 predictions, by the way, he did all the Power 4 schools or conferences. Utah 8-1, K-State 7-2. Kansas State, Kansas, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, West Virginia 6-3, UCF 5-4, and then after that, TCU and Tech 4-5, Arizona State, Baylor, Colorado 3-6, 2-7, BYU, Cincinnati, and Houston at 1-8. The teams that don't make a bowl game: Arizona State, Baylor, Colorado, BYU, Cincinnati, Houston, which is pretty much the same 6 across the board that most of us have agreed on.
Yeah, I think Baylor and Colorado are the wild cards there as far as bowl eligibility goes, that they could fall on either side of that line. I don't think it would surprise anybody. I think it would surprise you if Houston, Cincinnati, BYU made a bowl game. I think just in general, I think that's fair to say. Everybody else, I think you'd expect them to be in a bowl game of some sort. But, we're at that point now where glad we got Stewart Mandel on, but, man, we need to see some damn games because we truly are at the point where it's like we've talked so much about this that, like, we just need to see it now. You know what I mean? Because the Big 12 is so interesting, and you mentioned Tech and TCU there at the bottom. They could damn well be in the top 5, for all we know. I know they've got their holes and everything, but everybody's got the same layout at this point. We've all got the same, 6 teams at the top tier. We've all got, the same 5 teams in the middle tier, and we've all got pretty much the same 4 or 5 teams in that bottom tier. Now, you over thousands of people, there's going to be a little difference here and there, but I think for the most part, it's pretty well established. There's 6, 7 teams that could be in that championship game at the end of the year. So I'm just so excited to see what this actual mess looks like on the other side of it, and how did Colorado surprise people? Who did surprise people if it's not them? Who is getting a lot of credit right now and is actually nowhere near as good as we're propping them up to be for the last several months? Is it Kansas? Is it, I don't know, Utah? I can't wait. I am so thrilled that we're here.
The history of the conference shows that will happen.
Right. And everybody
one goes up and one goes down.
Is pretty much, collectively going with Kansas State and Utah. And I sat there last night because we had this question on the website, and I'm trying to go a different direction here and do something, but you read every piece of information and it says Kansas State and Utah should be the 2 teams in this championship game. Now, that doesn't factor in injuries and human error and all those things, which is why I'm so excited to get to what are those things going to be that prevents it from being K-State, Utah, or is it what we thought? And it's K-State, Utah because they were clearly the 2 best teams. I'm so excited because this is uncharted territory for every league in America. Everybody's going through a change of some sort, addition or subtraction of teams, or both. And, it's going to be wild.
How often in the SEC, prior to even Texas and Oklahoma joining for this year, how often did, and Garrett's not here today, he's off for the next couple of days, Jack again running the mothership, how many times or how often did teams at the upper echelon of the SEC drop? An Alabama, a Georgia, LSU. How many times did they actually? Tennessee kind of messed around for a little bit, but how many of them would drop into the second tier of the conference?
Only for a second. It wasn't. It happens to a lot of other programs, but Georgia, Bama, LSU, Georgia. And look, they're at their pinnacle right now under Kirby Smart, but people forget that Mark Richt had them pretty much in the championship game about every year, and then he just couldn't get over the hump. Yeah. And then they brought in Kirby Smart and took him there.
How often?
Not long. I mean, every couple of years, maybe somebody gets a quarterback hurt and they go 7-5, but the upper echelon of that league, which is, now Florida is probably the last one. Florida was the upper echelon of the league, and the minute Urban Meyer left, they've been kind of aimlessly
Sinking.
wandering.
Yeah, they've been sinking. Yeah.